อต้อนรับคุณผู้ชมทุกท่านนะคะเข้าสู่ช่วงของอาเซียนอัปเดตคุณผู้ชมคะหลังจากที่เราได้ทราบผลของการประชุมคณะกรรมการนโยบายทางด้านการเงินของธนาคารกลางสหรัฐ FOMC นะคะเป็นที่เรียบร้อยแล้วสรุปแล้วค่ะเฟดก็มีมติในการคงอัตราดอกเบี้ยนโยบายไว้ที่ระดับเดิมที่ 0.25 ถึง 0.5% ต่อไปในการประชุมเดือนกันยายนที่ผ่านมานี้ค่ะแต่ว่าตรงนี้ค่ะเฟดนั้นได้ส่งสัญญาณนะคะว่าจะเห็นการขึ้นดอกเบี้ยภายในสิ้นปีนี้1ครั้งแน่นอนการขึ้นดอกเบี้ยของเฟดนะคะจะส่งผลนะคะเป็นนัยยะสำคัญต่อประเทศตลาดเกิดใหม่รวมไปถึงอาเซียนอย่างไรบ้างวันนี้ค่ะเราไปหาคำตอบกันนะคะกับคุณเจมส์ Sullivan Director แล้วก็เป็น Senior Manager ของ Coram Fund Asset Management เขานะคะก็เป็นคอลัมนิสต์ประจำของนิตยสาร Financial Times เดินทางมาประเทศไทยค่ะแล้วก็ให้เกียรติพิเศษสัมภาษณ์กับทาง Money Channel ค่ะและในฐานะที่คุณเจมส์นะคะก็เป็นคนอังกฤษเขาจะมีมุมมองนะคะต่อสถานการณ์สหราชอาณาจักรออกจากสหภาพยุโรปเป็นอย่างไรบ้างเดี๋ยวเราไปหาคำตอบพร้อมๆกันได้เลยค่ะ
I think the big story if the Fed do raise rates and the dollar does strengthen. One of the big stories of the last 5 years, because the dollar has been very cheap to borrow, because rates have been close to zero, there's been a lot of borrowed dollars within emerging markets. And the figure that I read recently is that $9 trillion had been borrowed by emerging markets as a whole to fund their own economies. The issue for that area of the market, if their borrowings suddenly become more expensive, it's more expensive to pay back your debt. So the consequence of a strong dollar is that emerging markets will find it harder and harder to fund their liabilities and their debt. We can take that one step further by observing that a lot of emerging markets actually make their money on the resources trade. You know, they sell, they develop, and they sell natural resources, commodities. That market, of course, has fallen in recent years. So what one could have in a very unfortunate scenario is that your cost of borrowing, so your debt goes up, and yet your commodity market that you're sort of selling to fund your economy is going down. So again, you could have a complete divergence of assets and liabilities, and I think that would be a very big concern for some emerging economies. I think 2 years' time we may not even know what Brexit still looks like because you know, being based in London myself, we're now 3 months on from the referendum, and we've still had no real clarity or colour on how we are going to exit ourselves from the European Union. Brexit will happen, and there is a bit of uprising in the UK, and there are those who don't want it to happen. But of course, we have a very democratic referendum that took place, and the people spoke, and the people said that we do want to leave the European Union. So that will happen regardless of sentiment or negativity surrounding it. It's just a case of how long it's going to take the politicians to really determine how we exit the European Union. I think what will be important for the European Union now is whether Britain makes a success of Brexit or not. If it does make a success of Brexit, I think we may well see other economies in the European Union look at the UK and want a piece of independence. And that may further trigger a fragmentation of the European Union as we know it today. So the Dutch, the French, the Germans, they may...
You mean like they will want to leave as well?
Correct.
Why is that though? Because if they live as an independent country, then they will have less bargaining power, and then they won't be as a group anymore.
They won't be as a group. I think the less bargaining power may or may not be true. We'll have to wait and see whether that proves to be the case. But the biggest positive for any economy leaving the single currency bloc is that they would then retain ownership of their own currency. So they could dictate the strength or otherwise of their own currency. What we know about the European the euro, the single currency union, is that the weaker economies at the moment are struggling because of the strength of the euro. So you've got a real two-tier economy where you've got Germany that's thriving, and then you've still got the so-called pig economies, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, Spain, that are still struggling, and they need a significantly debased euro to allow themselves to become more competitive. So you've got a two-tier situation developing, a two-speed situation, and one currency, and it just doesn't suit all constituents. So gaining control of one's own currency allows you to become far more competitive because you can debase the currency. I think there are lots of fears out there. The biggest fear, I suppose, is that central banks do not grasp the tightening of monetary policy in an orderly fashion, and the markets become destabilized as a result, starting off with the bond markets, of course. I think that's a big issue. I think one of the big issues also is the political situation across the world. We've got the White House election, of course, coming up, and I think the market would act negatively if Donald Trump were to be Prime Minister of the United States.
What is the possibility of that?
There is a possibility, and if we believe the recent polls, it's very, very close at the moment.
Yes.
My belief is that Hillary Clinton will become the next President of the United States, but I think there lies a degree of volatility and risk ahead of that election. We look at the European political situation.
Yes.
We have the German elections next year, and I think that's a big risk as well. We've seen recently that some of the sort of anti-immigration parties in Germany have been doing very well, and if for whatever reason Angela Merkel were not the Chancellor of Germany this time next year, again I think that could be a catalyst for the sort of fragmentation of the European Union. Because without doubt, Angela Merkel is the glue that holds that community together at the moment. You know, she's got a lot of desire and will to make sure it's retained as a bloc. So I think that's a big risk. But I think as an investor, one of the biggest risks is the fact that developed markets are significantly overvalued. So if we look at historic valuation metrics, and we may measure that by a price earnings multiple, an average price earnings multiple is 14, 15 or 16 times earnings. That would be a broad sort of fair value territory.
Okay.
We've currently got multiples of north of 20 on the FTSE, 23, 24. We've got current multiples north of 20 on the S&P. Those valuations are not sustainable, and something has to change. Either earnings pick up to justify the valuation of the market, or the market comes down because earnings are not picking up. And if it's the latter, I think we could see significant losses across some developed markets.
Okay, so there are fears outside in the US and the EU as well, and how about in Asia?
Asia remains a hub of activity and a hub of growth, and I think one just has to be careful that when investing in Asia, you're not just buying the consumption rate of Europe or the US, because of course a lot of goods and services get exported from Asia to the consumer in the Western market.
Okay.
So one observation is to just shelter yourself from buying Asia, but really it's a proxy for Western growth. So how does one do that? Well, you look at the ASEAN economies, and there's true domestic consumption going on there. So investing in ASEAN bloc gives the investor true Asian growth exposure, and I think that's very appealing to a lot of investors right now. The risk is, of course, with the ASEAN bloc, it's very expensive to get access to it because it's a very small percentage of the index. A lot of money has come into the region, so there's been more money than actually sort of credible supply, i.e. there are not enough companies listed to absorb the wall of money that's come into the ASEAN economy. So at the moment they're very expensive, and that may change. And if it does change, we will certainly be buyers of more ASEAN stock.
ซึ่งคุณเจมส์ Sullivan Director และ Senior Manager ของ Coram Asset Management ค่ะมีมุมมองต่อการปรับขึ้นอัตราดอกเบี้ยของเฟดว่าจะส่งผลกระทบต่อความสามารถในการชำระหนี้คืนของประเทศตลาดเกิดใหม่รวมไปถึงของอาเซียนเพราะว่าเงินดอลลาร์นั้นมีการแข็งค่าขึ้นมาทำให้หนี้ที่มีอยู่นั้นมีมูลค่าที่เพิ่มสูงมากขึ้นในขณะเดียวกันนะคะในฐานะที่คุณเจมส์เป็นคนอังกฤษเขายังคงไม่มีความชัดเจนว่าสุดท้ายแล้วค่ะสหราชอาณาจักรนั้นจะถอนตัวออกจากยุโรปนะคะสหภาพยุโรปในวิธีไหนซึ่งก็เป็นเรื่องที่เราต้องมีการติดตามกันอย่างใกล้ชิดต่อไปทั้งหมดนี้ค่ะคืออาเซียนอัปเดตที่เรานำมาฝากกันค่ะ